Okay, morning everyone. Thanks for joining us. Welcome to today's event, which is building an exceptional talent pipeline. My name's Hayley. I'm part of the team here at Makers. So today we're going to be joined by three speakers. We've got Kay, who's the head of training here at Makers. We've got Martin Espelli, who's a partner at Deloitte Digital, and we've also got Alexandra Paulik, who is a junior developer at Alpha Systems. So today we're going to be hearing their advice on building a hiring and onboarding ecosystem to bring tech talent into your team. And they're going to be speaking in reference to the Pathway, which is a program that Makers developed to help facilitate that process. So at any point during today's event, you can submit a question that our panel will answer at the end. If you just go to the chat function, when we get to the Q&A section, I'll call out your name and we can go through the questions. A last kind of request from me would be if everyone online could put your microphone on mute for now, just so we don't have any kind of background interruption or anything like that. Yeah, that would be really helpful. So I think we're about ready to start. So I'd like to introduce our first speaker for today, who is Kaylak from Makers.
Thanks, Hayley. I am now going to pause for a moment while I share my screen. Great. Hayley, could you give me a thumbs up if you're seeing slides and not all of my notes? Great. Okay. My name is Kay. I look after training and education at Makers. And I came to Makers to shift from software engineering into teaching. I found myself really inspired by the journeys of our developers. And one of the biggest challenges that I noticed is that people and organizations, particularly the greatest of them, sometimes don't get the best out of each other, which I think is a real shame, because human history shows us, and we'll talk about some of this today, that organizations aligned with their people can achieve the most incredible things. And that's what drives me in my work here at Makers. So on to the talk. This talk is about why top tech companies have such strange recruitment practices. Why do the likes of Google and Facebook have these sort of very intimidating, or at least arduous interview processes, and why do candidates put up with it? Why does Netflix, for instance, ask people to leave at the first sign of underperformance? And why does Amazon bring people in from totally outside the hiring team and give them veto rights over every hire? In this talk, I'll explain the logic behind some of these practices, why hiring great people alone isn't enough, and how Makers can help you achieve similar results without compromising on your values and totally changing your recruitment practices. I'll do this by taking a quick detour through engineering history and explain a theory from economics. And there will also be a small section on fried egg sandwiches. So I hope you aren't feeling too hungry. You've had your breakfast. Otherwise, it could be a bit trying. Let's get into it. Start with some history. So this is a photograph of the Rogers Commission, which was assembled in 1986 to investigate the Space Shuttle Challenger disaster, which was a catastrophic explosion on launch of a space shuttle that resulted in the deaths of all on board that day. It's a terrible, terrible disaster. And this commission who investigated this disaster included the astronaut Dr. Sally Ride, who was the first American woman, and so far as we know, first LGBT person in space, along with Neil Armstrong, who's second from left here, and the physicist Richard Feynman. Now, there's a long tradition of engineering disasters being used to advance the industry and ensure such failures can never happen again, and this is no exception. So this group of people uncovered many powerful ideas, including the idea of the normalization of deviance, which is the phenomenon of poor practice gradually becoming more and more acceptable as small infractions don't immediately lead to disaster. And this idea remains a really important one in the healthcare industry to this day. But they also uncovered, I'll wait for this slide to actually show up, they also uncovered the precise mechanical cause of the failure. And you might think that in a space shuttle, which is a very complex machine, the cause of this failure must also be quite complex. But in fact, it's quite straightforward to understand it, and I'll explain it now. The rocket's boosters vent a lot of hot gas, which is how they generate this upward acceleration. And to avoid this gas escaping through small gaps in the components and destroying them, they use rubber rings that squish and seal under pressure. So your home plumbing may also use the same principle. Now, this launch took place on the morning after quite a cold night. And so the physicist Richard Feynman found a sample of this rubber, and he took it home and he immersed it in some similarly cold water. And he found that at this temperature, the rubber became quite stiff. And this meant that the gases then vented through the gaps around this rubber, eventually totally destroying the seal and causing the disaster, which you can start to see happening in this photograph. In the highlighted area, you can see that black smoke coming outside. And the thing to really pick up about this is that it's a small, relatively simple piece. It's not a big, complex thing. So fast forward to 1993, this Nobel Prize-winning economist, Michael Kramer, was inspired by this investigation. And out of his research, he proposed a theory called the O-ring theory of economic development, which is the central idea that I'll focus on for the rest of this talk. And at the core of this theory is the observation that complex modern products of industry can, like the shuttle or this engine shown here, become totally sabotaged by the failure of even one small component, like that O-ring. For these products to be any use at all, every component has to be up to scratch. And so every person working on it has to be doing great work, even if their job seems relatively unimportant in the grand scale. Kramer called these O-ring products. Another example of this is cooking. You might have experienced the problem of accidentally oversalting your food, and there's very little you can do about that other than just start again. And so in a team of top chefs, every single one depends on the work of every other to be top-notch. And that means that fine food is an O-ring product. Likewise with software. When I worked on a software team, I would regularly be amazed to open up the contributors list and see people I'd never met, perhaps people who no one at the organization still remembered. But occasionally, while fixing a confusing bug, I would encounter problems in their work that I would then have to go back and fix. Now, of course, this happens with even the best engineers sometimes, but the point is, since each element of a software project relies on many others, each engineer also relies heavily on many other engineers doing a good job. From this idea, Kramer derived a simple formula for product quality. Now let's consider a really simple case. This is where the food comes in, by the way. Let's say that you and I are making a fried egg sandwich. I'll fry the eggs and you toast the bread. But we're not very good cooks, and so there's a 50% chance that I'll burn the eggs and a 50% chance that you'll burn the toast, which ruins the whole sandwich. Now, because these failures compound, they essentially need both to be good for the whole product to be good, we multiply the percentages. This is what Kramer came up with. And this means we can only produce great sandwiches 25% of the time, not 50. And so you'll see if we had to add more steps, we'd barely make anything edible. If it was a BLT or something, somebody else was cooking the bacon. I believe it's a component of a BLT. So now let's take it to a more complex level. Let's consider some relatively highly skilled software engineers with a 95% chance of doing great work and a 5% chance of making a mistake somewhere that needs to be unpicked later. What's counterintuitive about this picture is that even with these much higher skilled people, the quality still isn't anywhere near 95%. Because mistakes compound in teams building O-ring products where each worker is highly dependent on each other's work, the result is much lower quality than you'd expect. You can see this play out with what software teams call regression. So you add a new feature and something else breaks and these mistakes actually add up. Now let's look at a couple of other examples. One where the quality is a bit higher, 99%, and another where it's a bit lower at 90%. And the differences are again dramatic. 4% higher quality in the engineers produces a 20% higher quality output, whereas 5% lower quality produces a 21% lower quality output. Now this is still quite theoretical, but actually it'll explain a few things that we already see to be true about talent in organizations. Our first insight is that if we can get everyone in the team a little bit better, the quality of the output significantly improves. The product you're shipping to customers, which in this age of digitalization, the product that's becoming much more important is dramatically better. Now, next we'll talk about what makes this so fiendishly difficult to do with normal hiring practices. So let's imagine that you are in a team of good but perhaps not great peers, producing average work as a result. You're considering whether it makes sense to grow and become better at what it is that you do. In yourself, you do care about doing great work and you would like to do better. But when you try, you find that your new skills have only a small impact on the overall quality of the output. Even worse, since the product is not dramatically better, it doesn't sell dramatically better. And so the additional resources your organization has to spend on your pay and your growth are also not that much greater. Even if they paid you more than your colleagues, the return on investment limits how much can actually be done in a sort of business sense perspective. And this brings us to our second conclusion. In a team of average skill, exceptional growth by any one engineer won't yield exceptional rewards. They'll still be disappointed by the results that their team can achieve for their customers. Now, maybe some people think like that, but all of us here, we're sort of conscientious people, and I'm sure everyone in your organization is too as well. And we strive to do great work regardless of the situation. But then what happens? Because your team is producing average work, not only are you disappointed with your personal impact, but your team gets given less important projects. And as a result, you start to get a bit demoralized. Even if you're highly paid for your team, you're paid less than your colleagues in other organizations with better people. Your department's results also limit your company's investment in your growth. And in summary, your talent is not yielding the results that you know it can. And so you start to dream of a much better team, another team where you're working with other highly skilled people, and as a result, producing much better work. Not only will this be more fulfilling, your organization will be better performing and so have more money to spend on your pay and growth. And so you leave to join this, high performing team somewhere, which is so much worse for your manager, who is hoping that by hiring someone brilliant, that they could turn things around. And this explains the common aphorism, which I have in my head, but I just realized this morning comes from Steve Jobs, which is that great people want to work with great people. They're not only more fulfilled, but their employers reaping the rewards of highly performing teams can offer much higher compensation. And as a result of this, performance tends to persist. In these complex, highly integrated products where each person influences the success of every other person, average teams tend to stay average. And while great teams do have challenges to stay great, greatness is theirs to lose. Now, all of our organizations exist on a continuum of skill, makers included, and it's useful to be able to work out where it is that you sit. And so I'm going to lay out three differences. The first and most important one is that talent tends to move from lower to higher skill organizations, wanting to work with better people on more fulfilling projects and to be better compensated. So look at the CVs that are passing your desk. Are they from organizations that you respect? And where are your levers tending to go? Secondly, observe how your team members relate to each other. Do they feel that they can only truly do great work alone, or do they relish the opportunity to collaborate? And thirdly, observe how they engage with L&D opportunities and then how long they stay afterwards. Now, all of this is, pretty miserable. And at the start, I promised not just to talk about, the logic behind this, but also what you can do about it. And that moment's now come. Top tech companies do solve this problem, but they don't solve it by normal hiring alone. So I'll first talk through what the big tech firms do, and then tell you about how we at Makers can help you do it as well. So Netflix is, renowned as a high talent organization, and it's not that way by accident. After losing a third of their staff in the dot-com crash, they made it their mission to retain only the very best. And so they asked people to leave freely and easily if they're not meeting the bar. In fact, they've built their culture around this. And they even did this with their co-founder, Patty McCord, who actually developed a lot of this culture in the first place. Now, this is not a good approach for many organizations. This would be quite disruptive in the normal company. We certainly wouldn't do it at Makers. Amazon, on the other hand, have a practice they call bar raisers. And these are interviewers brought in from outside the hiring team, outside the team that is hiring, to be part of every hiring process. And their express aim is to ensure that every new hire is better than 50% of people in the organization in similar roles. And they have veto rights over any and all hiring decisions. And this approach is somewhat more practical for the average company, although certainly not without some challenges. And this is what we do, Makers Pathway. With Makers Pathway, we help you raise the bar in your engineering teams with brilliant junior talent. And we do this by finding incredible people who want to make the jump to a new career. These are people who've done amazing things already, but who employers won't hire for such a small reason as the fact they don't have tech skills yet. Of course, we can give them those. We've had media talent agents, a movie director who worked with Idris Elba, educational psychologists, startup founders, business owners, refugees, aerospace engineers. far more than I can name in this talk. And we work with them for 3 months and see how they thrive in computing, challenge them, and give them strong engineering values to ensure they are always delivering high quality work, even if it's on, smaller O-ring type projects. We then select the ones who are a really good fit for a given company and send them to your teams. We only send great people, and so you know that your team is always choosing from a top-notch pool. They then work for us on contract to you for the first year, after which you can hire them permanently. And this co-branding helps you beef up your employment offer with the high standard of training that we're known for. And these candidates, they're excited to work with us, which makes them excited to work for you. And throughout this first year, we provide them with professional coaching to help them navigate any challenging situations in the workplace and raise them then with you to help you increase the chances of retention. And we provide bar-raising technical coaching and mentorship to ensure that they keep their standards high, no matter what engineering environment they might enter. Here are 2 people we're really proud to call makers. The first is Imtiaz. I worked with Imtiaz on the pathway, and it was a really fascinating experience. I was halfway into my first session with him, and I realized I'd spend most of the time answering his questions rather than asking him any. Really, really smart guy and beloved by his team, promoted to a senior role in just 2 years and now helping Global Relay expand their new London office. Alishka, we might hear more about later. She studied at Makers after 7 years of consulting. And, of course, this is a massive boost to her capacity at Deloitte, leading to a very compelling career trajectory. And these are the sort of stories we want to create more of with the pathway. But the real magic is what happens when you stick with it over time. We discussed how it can be difficult to take brilliant people and place them in an existing team. But since the pathway is a sustainable talent pipeline rather than just a one-off, you can make a real impact on effectiveness over time. Here's an example of how it can play out if you take 2 junior developers from us per year to replace your natural attrition. In year 0, your team is performing at an average level. In year 1, we place 2 makers with you, raising quality a small amount. And now we're assuming that due to the challenges we mentioned before, some of the makers we'll send you will move on too. And so in year 2, 1 maker leaves and 1 is promoted to mid. This, along with 2 new junior makers, starts to raise the bar. And in year 3, this continues to build. By year 4, you're starting to attract better external senior talent as well, which we can also help with. Now, this isn't just a diagram. This is actually how it's played out with one of our longest standing partners, Deloitte. Deloitte have been regularly hiring makers for 5 years, and we're really proud to be working with them. And we've invited Martin Espelli, a partner at Deloitte, to talk to you today about how makers have helped them drive improvement and raise the bar. And so this is the point at which I hand over to Martin and stop sharing. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. That's brilliant. I saw the Alishka cameo. I'll tell her she was on it. Can you all hear me okay? I can see some of you. I can't see all of you. It would be lovely to see more of your faces if you're done your makeup and you have good lighting in your rooms or whatever. I do find it still a bit weird just talking into my screen when even if I've been doing it for 6 months. I'm going to share my screen though. Can you see that now, everybody? Yes. Right. So I'm Martin. We do this exercise with my teams called This Is Me, and it's this great exercise to kind of build, to help teams understand more about each other than just the professional level, and to kind of build some interpersonal relationships. And as part of that, I did this mind map that was part of the exercise. I can really recommend it if you have a chance to do it with your teams. So this is me. Here are some facts. I'm not going to go through all of this, but as Kay mentioned, I'm a partner at Deloitte Digital. I actually joined Deloitte as a graduate. And my background is in software engineering. So I've kind of looked after, I've been an engineer, I've been a senior engineer. I've been kind of looking after our digital engineering capability for in various guises for a number of years. So that's kind of my background. I still code, that's still something I really love doing. Other couple of things I do, I work in public sector. So I'm currently leading a really big program of work with lots of makers on it, actually. For one of our central government clients, building digital products, so software engineering, and I'm famous for being a strict 12 o'clock lunch person, so I probably wouldn't have joined this if it didn't finish before 12. So look, that's me. I want to talk a bit about kind of junior talent though, and so I have a real kind of pet peeve. I have a lot of pet peeves, to be fair, but I have one particular pet peeve around companies and even sometimes, you know, people in our teams that say, you know, we'll only hire senior people. We should just go out, you know, pay top dollar, get the really experienced engineers in this case, and you know, that's how we're going to make sure we got, you know, we're doing great work. And I think that is a fundamentally flawed approach to life. And there are a couple of reasons for it. I mean, the first one becomes a bit philosophical. So, you know, I then ask them, right, okay, so where do these senior engineers come from? And then we sometimes have to get into, you know, the birds and the bees and the storks and those kind of things. But fundamentally, we need junior engineers because one day they'll become senior engineers. And again, reflecting on our experience in Deloitte, probably some of our most impactful, I mean, it's not every single, it's not a universal thing, but I think if I sort of measured which of our current senior engineers have had the biggest, most outsized impact relative to their experience, you know, a majority of those will be people that have spent a good amount of time in the firm. And that is kind of obvious because you get to build your networks and your relationships, but also I think those are people that have shaped the organizations around them, not just been shaped by the organization. You know, and so I think having that influence is something that you earn over time. So that's really important. I also think that there is a bit of an obligation to this. You know, even if sometimes they leave us and they go somewhere else. You know, if we don't contribute to the pool of engineers in the wider economy, then that feels a bit parasitical to me. But the other thing is actually, I think junior engineers are incredibly valuable. So there are a lot of jobs that are best done by junior people, maybe because they're a bit more repeatable, maybe because you know, they're, to a senior engineer, they might be a bit less interesting. And I think the problem with giving slightly less interesting jobs to slightly more senior people is that they tend to over-engineer the answer, and that's not necessarily a good thing. So let the senior people worry about the, you know, intellectually interesting problems. Let them worry about how to help the junior people be productive, and that works really well. But probably the most important thing is that I think having junior people really improves the dynamics. So a team that is diverse in all kinds of dimensions, including seniority, and many other things. This isn't a diversity talk, but is better. And you know, I work with some brilliant junior people, including many brilliant junior people from Makers. I learn a lot from them. They add a perspective to the way that we work that makes us produce better outcomes for our clients and makes us a better business. So I, you know, we really care about that. And it's, you know, it's not like we just have junior people that are code monkeys and are copying the machine. They're really integral, important parts of our teams. So that's why we need junior people. But then, you know, where do we get them from? And actually, our strategies, we have quite a sort of a broad, diverse talent pipeline. So unfortunately, Makers is not the only place we get them from, but they are, and you know, Makers is an increasing source for us, and both in terms of quality and quantity. And I'll get onto that in a second. But you know, we have a sort of more traditional campus recruitment graduate scheme where we hire people on an engineering path, generally for aptitude. So they don't necessarily, you know, computer science graduates, but for aptitude. And we train them a bit in the classroom, a lot in the job. We run apprenticeships, most recently for kind of career switches in partnership with Makers actually, but we run other apprenticeships too. And we do lateral hire at all levels. So we, you know, maybe not like with 0 years of experience, but we do experience hire of, you know, 1 or 2 years in their careers when we come across them. So we have a number of places that they come from. So why Makers? As I said, I think Makers for us, 5 years ago, I can't even remember now. I used to be able to name all the Makers that we hired, right? So I used to be able to list them in the order we hired them. I can't do that anymore because I've lost track of how many there are. Some of them are still with us, some of them have left us. But it's been a real success story for us. And it started in sort of Deloitte Digital, the part that I sit in, but it's expanded to other places. I've seen Duncan is on this call actually. So that's where he sits, is another hirer of Makers. And actually broader in the firm, a little bit through kind of word of mouth really. But just reflecting on why that's kind of worked and grown, I think there are a couple of reasons. So one of them is really kind of strong cultural alignment. I think one of the things I find really valuable with the Makers that we meet is they've got good values, they're kind of good human beings, and they've learned some important things that aren't technical, but they're about like how to be a good member of a team, or how to be a good member of a professional organization, and how to think about kind of other factors that are important, like diversity, inclusion, respect, those kind of things. So that really matters, and we found right from the beginning there's a really good alignment. Second thing is they got some really good skills. I think, to be honest, the most important skill that a software engineer can have in 2020 is how to use Stack Overflow really well. Modern software development is Stack Overflow driven development. If you don't know what Stack Overflow is, it's a website that has all the answers to all the programming problems, and you just need to know how to search it. It's not entirely true, but the point being that I think the ability to help yourself and help yourself effectively and be a good use of your senior's time, so ask intelligent questions at an appropriate time, so not too many, not too few, is actually one of the most important skills that a junior person can have, because it's how they bootstrap themselves to become better faster. And I think that's something we found that our Makers grads, maybe in preference to some of our more traditional kind of campus recruitment graduates, have got a really good skill at doing that. And I think it's something to do with how they're being taught at Makers. So that's really powerful. And then I think the other kind of two things that really help us, there's a bit of a try before you buy type mentality here. And I think it goes in both directions. So the pathway, this idea that effectively, they're employees of Makers Inc. We put them on a 12-month contract, or we have a 12-month contract with Makers for their services. We pay them a fixed day rate for that time. And at the end of the 12 months, the expectation is that we convert them to a permanent employee. So that's sort of the model. I think that allows us to make sure that the people that we're bringing on are kind of work in Deloitte, and I'll come on to that in a minute, but also allows them to decide that this is the job they want. And I think one of the things I've found about Makers, that some of the early ones we hired, is that it was a little bit like the kind of rebound relationship. So we had career switchers that had sort of, they'd had a job at a big corporate, maybe. They decided they hated that job. They'd gone to Makers because they wanted to change their career and become a software engineer. And they've come to Deloitte because it was kind of the best of both worlds, I guess, like, big job stability, etc., but still kind of doing software engineering. And then they realized that what they actually didn't like was working for a big corporate, or I'm making us sound like a big corporate when I don't think we really are. But maybe the problem was having a job in some cases, and that's, they wanted to not have a job. So I think there's a way to kind of test that fit in both ways, and that's really valuable. And I think we've seen the quality. So this wasn't always the model, right? The pathway thing is the last couple of years. I think we've seen the quality and the stickiness of the people that we've got has improved through that, because I think it's it just kind of creates a bit of a dynamic. But the other thing is the follow-up that the graduates get through that process. So there's kind of regular check-ins with Makers. Makers have regular check-ins with our kind of line managers of those people. There's this kind of three-way conversation that goes on, and that really helps. So I should come on to that in a second. And I think the final thing is that by having worked with Makers over a long period of time, we've gotten better at how to recruit Makers. Like, what questions do we ask in interviews, and what kind of patterns do we look for? And often they're about, is a job at a company like Deloitte the right thing for you, rather than do you know how to code in JavaScript, because they kind of all do that. And then as another Deloitte person, just trying. And conversely, I think Makers has gotten very good at helping their graduates understand who would enjoy a career with us and who wouldn't. And I think that's really fun. Like we're a professional services company. We work with clients. We have particular kind of technologies that we lean towards, but we're quite technology agnostic. There's all sorts of things about Deloitte that are a great fit for some people and a terrible fit for others. And so when I interview Makers, generally speaking, that's what I'm trying to work out. Do you want to work for us? Because I know that by the time that Will and the Makers team have given me a CV, I know they got the skills. This is more of a question of whether it's the right fit. And that's really, I find really, really powerful. So once they get here, what kind of happens? I kind of mentioned the check-ins and the pathway. I think that's been a massive improvement. And I think that, it's kind of had, so we've had a few people that have had, mental health type challenges or personal things outside of work that have been a difficulty for them. A few people that have joined and maybe found that it kind of wasn't quite what they were looking for. But by having that kind of 3 stakeholder type relationship, the individual, Makers, and us, and by having good kind of lines of communication, we're able to help those people. So in some cases, we help them find other roles. It's not been that many, maybe 1 or 2. In some cases, we help them find other roles within Deloitte that they're happy with. In some cases, we just help them overcome whatever they're struggling with them and put them on the right kind of path forward. So that's been really valuable. And I think, that comes at the end of these people having spent 3 months at Makers, so that there's already a relationship there. Whereas I think when you hire, and this is a challenge, experience is weak, or somebody we hired 6 months ago, you know, she's very good, never quite kind of found her place, never realized that she could call for help. And by the time, you know, she kind of quit and got another job, it was kind of too late for us to really understand what was troubling her in her role, and we could have helped her, but it was kind of too late. So I think that relationship, especially people at the beginning of their careers or in new careers, I think it's really valuable. And when I speak to the makers we have, they really value that relationship as well as individuals, which is obviously great. I think the other thing that really matters for us, just as kind of from our experience, is get them on the right kind of project. So unlike a product company, you know, we do lots of different projects and they're driven by what clients buy from us. So it's very important that they end up in a project where they can use their skills, where they're well supported, where we know where they get to kind of grow and learn. And so we put a lot of effort, and you know, most of the time we're successful, and some of the time I'd admit we're not, into finding them the right kind of first project, second project, because we can be a bit more variable, I think, than let's say a smaller product company where you interview with a team you're going to work with. In our case, you interview with me, you may work on my project, but you may work on Duncan's project or someone else's project. So that's important. I think the other thing that probably really matters though, and it's quite important, is that we treat them as if they're members of staff on day one. So from an HR technical perspective, I guess they are contractors in our books, and they're kind of employees of makers formally. But as far as possible, and we put a whole bunch of effort into this in terms of systems and processes, and it's, you know, kind of hasn't been that easy, but we try to erase as many of those differences as we possibly can. So for example, when I bring a maker on, the plan is to convert them to perm in 12 months. I don't have to go and seek, you know, recruitment approval in 12 months time to convert them. It's implied. Helps that I'm the person approving the recruitment, but you know, it's a principle that kind of works. Secondly, you know, we manage them through talent process and so on as anybody else. We treat them exactly like everybody else 98% of the time, and then there's the kind of 2% of the time where for some reason that doesn't work. But that is really important, because I think it makes the try before you buy thing real. And secondly, it avoids this kind of dual class citizen type thing that I think has caused some problems in the past. So that's really, really important. Where does that lead us? Where did they end up? Well, I haven't actually done the stats on this, but I think it sort of roughly breaks down like this. So probably about 70% of the people that we take on through the pathway are like, they just smash it. They're brilliant. They land on a project, they're productive after a week or two, they grow through their career really quickly. You know, they're really, you know, I think that there's a lot of kind of demand for people like that to kind of come and join different projects within the firm, because they've got a great, they've just got a great kind of, they bring something to the teams they're in, and they've got really valuable skills that we need. I think another kind of 10-15% get to that point eventually, but they have a tricky start. So that might be, you know, whether this is the right place for them. It might be something going on outside of work. And so that's where all that support really comes in. But they kind of, after a few months, we get them to a place where they're comfortable and happy, and again, they convert the perm. We've had a couple of instances where they've needed a bit longer to make a decision, and that's been kind of fine. We just run the pathway for another 3 or 4 months. And I think probably about 10-15% of them don't, right? So they decide it's not for them, or we decide they're not for us. And that's good too. You know, I think we've, you know, that means we've helped someone make the right decision. We've been looking after them for a while, but now it's someone else's turn. So I don't view that as a failure. I think, you know, the point is not to force everybody to join Deloitte, you know, against their will. It's to find the people that fit. But I think that's compared to our normal rates of attrition, that's actually pretty good. So I think that's for me, that's very successful, and I think it's become more successful over time. So I think in our very earliest kind of hirings of makers, where the model was a bit different, and we took them kind of on as employees on day one, and I think we weren't as good as at kind of painting the right picture for them, and you know, the relationship hadn't grown to the point where it has now. You know, our rates of attritions among makers was kind of higher than the underlying population of staff. I think now it's lower, and that for me is a really good success. And I will say, I really like to talk, Kay, and I think I really recognize a lot of those. I might steal some of those statistics and charts actually, but I think that's very true. I think there is something here about you know, raising the bar among our junior people and letting those junior people grow to raise the bar across all our senior people. That was kind of all I wanted to share, really. I'm kind of hoping we're going to do some Q&A. But yeah, thank you. That's me. And look, just a kind of open offer. I'm really happy to talk about anything really, as you can probably tell. But certainly our experiences with makers and what's worked and what doesn't, and even if you work for a competitor, I really love to talk to you about it. So if anybody wants to get in touch with me, that's my email address. Find me on LinkedIn, whatever, and I'm really happy to chat. And with that, I'm going to turn off my screen share and hand over, I think, to Alexander. Is that right? Yes.
All right, thank you. I will take over from here. Wonderful. So I will just share my screen. Hopefully that works well. And just let me see where I am in a presentation. And there it is. And share. Can you please show me if you see my presentation? Wonderful. Thanks, Kai. Thank you, Jenny. All right. So my name is Alexandra, and makers asked me to speak about the story of my transition from my previous career through the bootcamp starting in May 2019 to my new career as a software developer in Alpha Financial Software. Of course, I was very thrilled to be asked about that, but I admit this is not my natural habitat to talk about my experiences, so let's try. What did I do before Makers? Well, I have always been oscillating in the area of social research and media, print and radio. I graduated with master's degree from anthropology in University of Warsaw. I'm Polish, and also with the degree from journalism and social communication. Well, since my youngest age, I always wanted to be a war correspondent. And in order to pursue that dream, and actually it wasn't really a dream, it was more like a conviction. I wanted to tell the stories of people who've been through difficult times and who didn't have the voice. I was very determined, so I went on to travel to Afghanistan and I started working in a local radio station. But when I got to Kabul and stayed there for a while, I understood that I can't possibly be a war journalist, war correspondent, because when I hear an explosion, I would rather run away from it than run towards it. So that was off the cards. So I needed to reflect what I would like to do with my life then. And then I decided that rather than write about the world, I would prefer to actually change it so there would be no explosions. That was very idealistic. I was in my early 20s. So I started working in non-governmental organizations, and I started where I knew what I was doing a bit. I started in an NGO that was working in media development and journalist training. One of those projects that I worked on in those early days was a project called Kabul Innovation Lab. And Kabul Innovation Lab, it was a hackathon of sorts where programmers from Afghanistan, from Kabul, would be paired up with media outlets, and they would develop solutions for press agency or for a radio station or for a TV station in Kabul. And that was actually the first time there in Afghanistan that I have seen programmers at work, collaborating, solving problems. It was super refreshing in comparison to the aid economy or war conditions or conflict conditions that were outside. And I really got enchanted by this notion of problem solving, by those really energetic young programmers. And I thought that, yeah, one day I'm going to learn how to code. But I wasn't quite ready to give up my life in aid. So I stayed in Afghanistan for 5 years. I specialized in monitoring and evaluation of international aid interventions. And so what does it mean? I basically conducted studies checking how aid projects progressed and what impact did they have on the local population. and I would report the findings to clients or to other interesting parties. In the meanwhile, I have been considering coming back to academia. So I took 3 months of my work in Kabul. I did an internship at the United Nations University Maastricht School of Governance in the Netherlands. Netherlands are super cool, a really nice place to live. But I decided not to stay, and I actually finished my projects in Kabul and moved to London, where I currently reside, and I went on to study economics at SOAS. Economics, super fun. But then my work followed me to London, and I continued to work as a contractor, as an external contractor, evaluating international aid projects. And one of those projects that was actually in Afghanistan as well. But I encountered something really cool, data collection made by a mobile phone-based data collection system. It was an Android-based system, and it basically allowed an enumerator to go to the field somewhere in Afghanistan and collect data in a more secure way, because usually a enumerator would be very visible, with a pen and paper, but here there was this tech mobile solution that would make enumerators, so my team, my colleagues, more secure. And I was like, wow, eureka moment. I want to build those systems, because providing better tech for aid makes people more secure, and that will be my way of contributing to the greater good, or something along those lines. So instead of going on another evaluation to Pakistan, I actually closed down my laptop and opened it again, this time at Makers. And this is when I basically joined Makers to learn how to code. And that was the start of the truly great adventure. Okay, so then Makers asked me to tell you about what was the hardest and what I enjoyed the most at Makers. So yeah, cool and cool. So basically, let's think. Let's start from the hardest. Yeah, from the hardest. So that was completely different working style when I joined Makers. In my previous work, I mostly worked in the temporary teams of consultants, but I would work largely remotely with just short bursts of field work, and then I would basically produce solutions with a team, but independently. But when I joined Makers, I found myself pair programming every day for a few weeks on site. And whoever tried pair programming probably knows that working in that setting day by day and also changing the pair can be quite intense, because you are very close with another human being, and there is very little time to actually process what you have learned. And also the truth is that when you come from a career that you actually knew what you were doing in, when you pair program and someone is looking at your hands when you're typing, you feel really quite vulnerable, because you show that you don't know. That was difficult. But now, 1 year in my career as software developer, I know, yes, Makers were right. Pair programming is the best way to learn how to code, and really getting used to not knowing is the best way. Is the best way to just get rid of your ego, because you don't need your ego in your new career to stop you from asking the right questions at the right time. Also, pair programming is great in the sense that you see how other person solves problems. And now I can attest to that, that basically seeing how other people solve problems is the best way to learn how to solve them and to learn of those practices and to build on them. At Makers, it was, of course, a bit tricky because both persons in the pair didn't know what they were doing, but we were learning, and that was for sure. So that was the tricky bit, and also the cool bit. But what was really, really cool, really something that I really enjoyed, was the process of coding itself. Obviously, I take a great satisfaction from solving problems, especially when there is a teamwork and there is someone to share that satisfaction with. So I have really enjoyed the moments when we would put our brains together and build an app or develop a programming language. And this programming language was what I have done for my graduation project, I would rather say. So with 4 wonderful colleagues from my cohort, from my makers cohort, we have set out to develop a Python-based programming language that would be that would have a theme of a forest. The idea was basically to make a programming language that through which we tell a story of a journey through the forest. So we would have a tree delimiter or modulo operator. And it was quite fantastic to, just to play with those modulos and make them crows, or make equality operators owls, or rather like other funny foresty things. And but basically what was the most important here, it was that the makers didn't allowed us to be as creative as we wanted, to use the agile teamwork ways to build our projects and learn. So that was absolutely fantastic. And finally, makers asked me to give advice to fellow developers. So I have another slide for that, and here it is. So I thought about 3 different ways, 3 different advice, but there is a 4th one as well. So before makers, yes, the course is very intense. So if you ever decide hire a maker, you know that they worked hard over those months. So for the person before makers, do as much coding before the course as you can. When you know the basics, you can help others in the cohort, and then you can all build yourself together with that prior knowledge. And that will just give you a nice head start. For the person who's job hunting after the course, well, there are amazing companies that are hiring from makers, but different market conditions now. You don't know what happens. But if you are a person after makers and you have a choice to which company you would go, go to the company that offers you a structured on-the-job training or mentoring, and they're vocal about it. I personally have been extremely lucky because through the Makers Pathway, I found employment in Alpha Financial Software. Alpha is possibly the best company to work for. No offense, Deloitte. I'm serious. So basically, they have given me an extensive Java training from the start, and they give me an access to mentoring process every day or whenever I need it, and an open field to ask all the questions I needed to ask to do my job well. And also, I had access to 12 other makers that are already in Alpha, which basically adds this incredible feel of fantastic network that was already built for me through this incredible experience that we had together. So yeah, so that was for the person who is job hunting, and so find a company who will invest in you in a way. And if there are makers there, only better. And then for the person who graduated from makers and maybe it's already after the pathway and maybe already have been transferred to the permanent position, well, enjoy your wonderful coding career and find your way to give back to the community, maybe help disadvantaged people from disadvantaged backgrounds to learn how to code and open their eyes for that opportunity, or find your own way to the community, to give back to the community. And then something I didn't think before this presentation, but actually it's kind of obvious advice to you, hire makers, because why not, right? Yeah, that was it from me, and I wanted to thank you, and thanks to Makers, the bootcamp. Yeah, it's been a great adventure since I joined. So yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Alexandra, and thanks to all of our speakers for joining today. So if you'd just mind unsharing your screen quickly, and then I'll move on to
Yeah.
the Q&A section.
How do I unshare it? That's a good question. Mhm. All right, let's see. Sorry, it's one thing to prepare to make a presentation and then another to finish it, right? Okay. I will just leave for a moment and come back.
That's absolutely fine. So we've had a couple of questions come in through the event. So thanks everyone who has submitted one for our speakers. Also, if anyone wants to put your camera on, we'd love to see, see your faces. It's always nice to speak directly to people. Cool, so I'm gonna start from the top and just work our way through. So I think the first one we had is from Carrie. Is she still on the line? Cool. I'll read your question out for you. So this one was mainly directed to Kay, I believe. So it was asking, how does Amazon eliminate bias from their bar raisers? But I guess we could sort of broaden that out to how would any company go about eliminating bias?
Yeah, thank you for your question, Karen. Sorry about the sun. It surprises me as much as it probably does you. So for Amazon, I happen to know that they have a very sort of rigid criteria and questioning structure. And so that's their attempt to eliminate bias by just, asking the same questions, same order, no follow-ups. Of course, this is also quite intimidating. So I would probably say that this process is biased. It's just biased in a way that they've chosen. But it doesn't have to be that way. And the incredible thing about using Makers and Makers Pathway as the bar raiser is that it's about education, it's about growth. And because we work people for way longer than any company could interview them, we get to see how people really respond when you give them a challenge. So that's how we're raising the bar. Of course, in the top tech companies, they make all sorts of trade-offs to achieve the same result because they're not education companies.
That's great, thank you, Kate. And the next question from Christine kind of leads on from that one. So she's asking, do you consider bar raisers as technically stronger than 50% of the existing team? Yeah, Kay, I'll go to you, and then if great to hear from Martin as well.
Cool, yeah. So the short answer is no. And the thing I would take it back to is that O-ring example is, if you bring together like a big team of people who all like their main motivation is to build like really complex rocket systems, they're probably not going to do a good job of building like a full rocket because a rocket involves all kinds of small components. And so actually you need people to play different roles in different teams. There's a really great story about this that I'll just take a couple minutes to share, which is there was an astronaut, I can't remember the name, relays this story where he was about to go up in a rocket the next day. And so he was sort of walking around the area trying to get comfortable with the situation, with the surroundings. And he came across one of the caretakers, in NASA, even the caretakers are engineers of a sort, but someone who wasn't doing like a really high powered job because it was, late at night looking after it. And of course, this guy sees the astronaut, is like, what are you doing here? Like, had no idea who he was. Like, are you breaking into the rocket? Of course, he wasn't. Oh no, I'm going up in the shuttle tomorrow. And the caretaker says, well, wow, I mean, that's like a big thing you're doing, but I can tell you one thing, it's not going to fail because of anything that I've done. And so this is what eventually they found, or the story that this person relays, is that every person working on the shuttle really cared about their particular bit being like top notch and great. And that's what you need. I think that's what we would consider a bar raiser, is someone who really, really cares about doing great work. And of course, who has a track record, which we can see through education, of following up on this commitment and really trying to up their game, become a great professional. And so that's what we would consider a bar raiser, or at least at Makers. I wonder if Martin, you feel like adding anything, or Alexandra?
Yeah, we don't necessarily have that construct, though actually interestingly something we've talked about formalizing. I think diverse perspectives lead to better decisions as a kind of general rule of thumb. So having diverse perspectives in your hiring process helps. And again, that you can take that in a number of directions, but I think it's important to get different points of view on candidates. Also, because I think, well, like, I mean, we're consultants, right? So like, we're very good at finding solutions. And I sometimes find myself interviewing someone that I'm maybe a little bit unsure about, but the kind of consultant part of my brain kicks in. I'm like, how can I manufacture some answer that gets you a job here? Because that's the problem we're trying to solve together, which feels like a nice thing to do at a time. And then there's been a couple of cases, I've hired someone and I'm like, probably should have had a second opinion, because actually they're not very happy and they're not really working out, right? So I think just creating a slightly more objective perspective, I suspect, enables them to see where the 50% line goes better than the people that have spent a couple of hours, with these candidates, really trying to get under the skin of them and possibly, really want to help, right? But I think that's really valuable.
Cool, thank you both. So we're going to move on to the next question, which is also from Carrie. This one was for you, Martin. They're asking, how does Deloitte use some sort of software to sort graduate profiles, or an algorithm based on culture fit? So yeah, can you tell us a little bit about the selection process, please?
So actually, some of my recruitment colleagues are actually on this call. So Melissa might tell me that I'm lying here, but I know we don't, is the answer. And we do have a very talented team of people that screen. So we do have, with the volume applications we get, I'm not going to talk about makers now, actually, because makers is different. I'll talk about makers in a second. But for everything else, the volume applications we get, there is a kind of a screening stage before they get very close to the teams that would eventually hire them, because otherwise we would just get inundated. But it's a human process. And I personally, knowing a lot about how algorithms are built, I'm not sure I'd trust one to run my recruitment, frankly. In fact, I don't trust computers with anything, which I think is a common theme with those of us that work with them every day. With makers, just to kind of bring it back to that, it's much more of a kind of concierge type service. So basically, I talk to Will and I say, I think Will is one of the makers people that works with them. And I talked to Will and I said, Will, I'm thinking to hire 5 makers. He sends me 10 CVs and we hire 8 of them. That's generally what happens. So it's kind of, there's a little bit more, I suppose that's sort of similar to what an agency does. I just feel that makers and Deloitte, we know each other so well by now that we get to the right sort of people really, really quickly, which is why whenever I swear we're not going to hire more than 5, but yeah, well, they're really good. And then we end up with like 8, which is great. That's what it should be.
Cool. I wanted to ask Alexander as well, from going through that selection process, what was your experience of it?
What was my experience going through the selection process? Well, from my end, it looked like that basically there was a platform where different companies have been advertising their need for makers. And we makers, the graduates, we needed to write an application, sort of like a self-description, extended CV, answering the questions that companies asked that they wanted to know about us. And then basically, I guess, the hiring team from Maker's part would show the better applications to the companies. I, however, have not applied for Deloitte, so I don't know how that looks from their side. I know that after being, that Alpha basically invited me for an interview after 1 week after I graduated the bootcamp, after they received my application. And then, a month later, I was already in the job.
Just in terms of us, we do have coding exercises we use. We've gone through a few different incarnations of it. It's very difficult to create the right balance between something that is real world and interesting and something that is an appropriate thing to ask a candidate to do. And one of the things we discovered is that some of our tests were aggressive in that they or anti-inclusive in that they were very easy to do if you were you know, unemployed and had the means to not go and find a temporary job and didn't have any children to look after and right. But in some cases people were spending a lot of spare time on it, and it was just it meant that we kind of excluded a certain set of candidates. So we do sort of slightly more short sharp type exercises for some graduates. We don't do them for makers, actually. We used to do them for makers, but what we found was that by the time the makers had been recommended to us, the technical quality of what they did was pretty consistent. So we kind of knew what we were getting. And we do ask technical questions at interviews to check aptitude and so on, but we don't make them do an exercise because they all pretty much got the same scores on them. And so it didn't add that much value.
Thank you, everyone. So hopefully that answers your question, Carrie. Lovely. So the next question we have is from Nonye asking, what were the key reasons for leaving from the initial attrition?
I imagine that was for me, because I think that came when I was speaking about how the early makers we hired, we had a higher rate of attrition. And I think, I mean, there were probably a couple of reasons. The theme I'd probably pull out was that, so the other part of my consulting brain is I sell stuff, right? So like I got a client and go, hey, Delight's amazing, come work with us. And I think when you are interviewing people, it's a two-way job, a two-way street, right? Like the candidate is interviewing the company and the company's interviewing the candidate. I think it's really important. I spend a lot of my time now with makers telling them why they shouldn't work with Deloitte, and if they still want to work with us after the end of that, I think they're a pretty good fit. And the reason for it is that I just think different people fit in different companies and have different aspirations. You know, so professional services type people and back office IT type people and product company type people and startup type people. I mean, obviously it's not as black and white as that, but I, you know, I mean, I think one of the really good metrics you talked about, Kay, was like, look at people that are joining you, where are they coming from, people that are leaving, where are they going? Yeah. So we don't actually lose a lot of people going to other consultancies. It does kind of happen, but it's not the most common thing. Definitely lose people going to startups. And it's like, I just want to go work for a startup. I want a startup. So if you want to work for a startup, let me help you find a startup where you can survive. And when that startup fails and you want to come back, come and talk to me, is kind of generally the message, right? And product companies that are probably like, you know, maybe not startups anymore, but I think we hired a lot of product company minded people who want to work on a single product over a longer period of time, and or who had very specific and stable technical desires. Like, I want to work with React.js all day long. You know, we're a business where we value fungibility of technology. So I think it was more those kind of things, rather than, you know, they weren't good engineers, or, you know, that they, you know, we didn't look after them or something. It was more actually they were looking for something different. And I think that's actually, you think, yes, especially as when you're hiring junior people, you have a bit of an obligation to help people with that, right? Because I think when if you're hiring someone who's been in the industry for years, they probably walk in with a very clear view of what they want. But certainly when I was a graduate, I had no idea what I wanted. You know, I've ended up in Deloitte a little bit by accident. It's worked out pretty well for me so far, but like, I didn't know that 15 years ago. So I think you do need to kind of help those people. And I think that's what we got much better at the interview process, just help them to make a selection and find the right kind of fit.
Yeah, thank you. And I think I'd ask Kay as well, like from kind of maker's perspective, obviously the pathway is something that's constantly being developed. How has the program been changed to kind of like help match candidates to kind of like avoid that similar issue?
Yeah, totally. So we learn from companies the more we work with them. That's one of the reasons it works so well with Deloitte, as we know who sticks, who finds it difficult, who works. And the other key part of this is, I think, working with particularly managers who come from perhaps a technical only background. Maybe they've been promoted, it's their first management job, maybe their second, and they're not perhaps 100% sure where to put juniors. They sort of see themselves, it's a classic management area, seeing yourself and thinking, well, I could do this task, maybe I could give it to the junior, maybe they just do it, but slower, and doesn't really work. And so we help them learn skills like breaking down these complex technical problems and giving juniors things that still have to be done to a really high standard, but a smaller scope of things. And that's something we help with on the pathway, just helping essentially the management of the company like get the most value out of their new people. And that's something I think it's probably the highest leverage thing that we do, actually, because if it's the thing, I sometimes, slightly weird analogy, but I sometimes liken us to a bit to like a dating company. It's about building great connections between companies and people. And so we get the opportunity to help be that glue in the process to ensure that the manager is helping the new maker succeed, and the new maker is helping that manager demonstrate really good work as well.
Imagine having to do a 12-month intensive immersive experience before you were allowed on Tinder.
Might improve it somewhat.
I mean, I don't know. Happily married, you know.
The next one was also for UK. That's just asking. Marcin was asking, what was the name of the person behind the compounding percent theory?
Yeah, I just put this in the chat so you can copy paste. There's actually a really good video on YouTube if you search O-ring theory of economic development that lays out actually how it, like a more complex version of the stuff that I've spoken about, and you can sort of see where it fits in. So yeah, recommend it.
Thank you. We'll be sending everyone a follow-up with kind of key bits and pieces from today as well. So I'll include the link in the email as well. Cool. So okay, the next question was from Mark, directed to Martin, asking, what does Deloitte Digital offer in terms of flexible working, work from home, flexibility with hours, etc.?
Yeah, so yes is the answer. We do all those things. And I'm really proud of actually that what we do there, and I think we've improved it quite a lot in the last couple of years as well. So, you know, parental leave policies. And we call it agile working, which I really actually dislike because for me, agile is a software development approach, and so it's like agile working. Well, all the working is agile, but we yeah, we do a lot of that stuff. As with any company, it's a two-way conversation, right? So it's what do you need and what works in the professional context. And in my current role, I get to approve a lot of those things. I've never not approved any of them, right? So like, you know, we find a way to make it work. And obviously we're all working from home, so we're very good at that. I'm very fascinated actually to see what happens in, you know, 4 or 5 years time when we're all out of this pandemic mode. Sorry, I didn't mean to say that. And we how much homework in that. I can't imagine I'll ever go back to 5 days a week commuting to London. Why would I? I'd like to do a bit more, but you know. So I think like many businesses, we're kind of evolving our understanding of how that works and what that means, right?
And I guess to expand on that as well, do you feel like offering that flexibility is kind of something that's helped you with kind of retention of your juniors into?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I'm not sure it's ever really applied to makers per se. I can't think of any makers that are on an agile working type arrangement for no other reason than that it just hasn't. I think I guess there's kind of two levels of it. So there's like the formal version of it, where it's like, you know, we change your contract, you're now working 4 days a week, and so you get paid 4/5 of your pay and all those kind of things. That's the sort of slightly more structured HR type thing. There's also and I think more commonly, the more informal stuff. So just to take an example, my kids do a thing on Wednesday afternoons that I need to basically drive them to and sit there while they're there. And I have 90 minutes of uninterrupted time, but then I can't be on a call or a meeting, you know. I just do that. And, you know, like, we're very understanding of those kind of things. And we, you know, lots of people in my teams who have those kind of commitments that, you know, they're more just managed through the work rather than any kind of particularly, you know, kind of formal contractual arrangement, because it just makes it harder, right? So I think there's a lot of that stuff. And I think that's really valuable from a cultural perspective. You know, being a business that respects people as humans in their lives is sort of, I mean, it seems kind of obvious. A lot of my management philosophy is about like, just don't be a dick, and that seems to work pretty well. And it's possibly, like, I don't know, underrated. But we you know, I think we do a lot of that, and I think it is important from an attraction and retention perspective, absolutely. You know, and we get comments on how that's really valued. I got no statistics on what impact it's had. You know, it'd be lovely to see whether that, you know, is that just my opinion, but it would feel that way, certainly.
Cool, thank you. The new Deloitte slogan right there.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. So the next question was from Jenny to Alexandra, asking, how do you compare coding to your original idea of being a reporter? Will you carry on coding or move on? And also, how do you convince kids to code when they think it's technical? she's an enterprise advisor in schools and wants to convince children to get into IT.
Okay, so there are some similarities in the work of a reporter and of the programmer, surprisingly. So basically, it's a lot of asking questions. You can't, when you don't know, you really ask. And then it's just the difference what you do with the answer, right? But when I was trying to when I tried to follow that path of more of writing or radio reporting, I was hoping to basically help to solve real world problems, but with the tool of media, with trying to show those issues the wider public. So maybe there will be a policy change, or yeah, there will be some positive change. So basically, I feel like programming, coding is simply a different tool that can be applied to solving real world problems, either in the corporate world and through that to improve the greater good, or in the NGO world. And I will definitely stay in programming. I'm completely hooked up. It's a wonderful career. It's really, I feel really happy coming to work every day. And I will probably stay in Alpha as long as I can meaningfully contribute, because I really enjoy working in this environment. But as my side project, I'm probably going to try to explore more the tech for good approaches. And that's something really cool. Also with the company I work for, or other companies that offer the CSR activities, that you can spend the company time on doing something that you are truly passionate about. And that's what I'm trying to do as well. And how to convince kids to programming. Okay, so I am not sure, I'm not very good with kids, but what I know is that many people have this feeling that they want to make an impact and that they want to influence other people's lives positively. And perhaps packaging tech in a way that, hey, this is this incredible tool that can help you to do something meaningful, to impact others. And then also, like, check it out, it's actually almost a magic. You write some letters and then something really incredible happens. Maybe something along those lines.
Thanks so much, Alexandra. So the last question that we've got on the chat for today is directed to both Kay and Martin, asking, in a high growth scale up organization, you often deal with a lot of change and structure changes rapidly. Is there a time in an organization's growth or essentials an organization needs to have in place in order to set up a junior or maker for success?
Yeah, it's a great and also like quite challenging question, right? Because at that point in an organization's growth, there's so much change to be going through, and you often don't get to see the results of your work until your decision, so it's too late to really do anything about them. So we've had makers who go to startups, in fact, who own startups, who join scale-ups, and I think it probably won't surprise you, but one of the differences, just their attitude to risk and change. Different people have different attitudes, and so some people go to larger companies and they're happy there, and some people go to smaller ones and they sort of come with a bit more of that sort of, it's not exactly resilience, but it's a different sort of mindset, I think. And so they're, in fact, I'm thinking right now of one of our graduates, PJ, who actually job hunted like quite a bit longer because he was really, really excited about working in startups, and he wanted to find like the perfect startup for him. And he works at Clio and still works there. And it's been an exciting journey for him. So there's that side. However, another bit is having like a bit of stability, I think really helps. And so, one of the, there's sort of a question they ask of staff engagement sometimes where it's like, do you have a best friend at work? And I think actually that's probably a really important bit of having like one or two consistent relationships throughout change. Of course, for organizational structure reasons, it's hard for that to be a manager sometimes, although the manager does help, but making sure that everyone has someone they can spend time with, and that's probably not going to be a manager because those people are very busy. Just making sure that bonding actually happens, and that if there are changes to staffing, that somebody still has someone to talk to. And one other thing is that, of course, because I'm from Makers, I can drop in that with our pathway makers, they always have a pathway coach who they can go to and talk to about any challenges they have. And so even if there's a lot of change in the organization, we're still there, stable and consistent for them. So it's a tough challenge, and if you're in that, I definitely feel you on it. Those are my thoughts on it. Martin, I imagine you have like probably reams more experience on that one.
I don't know. I mean, we're kind of a interesting place in that. So on the one hand, Deloitte's like a massive company, right? I think we have 13,000 employees in the UK, something I've seen. But on the other hand, I don't really feel that way a lot of the time. So Deloitte Digital, for example, which is kind of like my little pocket, we kind of felt a bit like a startup, not really, but like a sort of an internal startup for a while. We were very small and we've grown very rapidly. We kind of started with less than 100 people, and we're now nearly 1,000, I think. And I think every engagement, every project that we do, sometimes they're quite short, sharp. They kind of build a prototype, help with this pitch or something. But the sort of projects that our engineers will end up on tend to be a bit bigger, a bit more complex. So they could be like one or two, or in my case, I've got about 15 teams working for me at my clients. And so they become almost our organizations themselves, right? Like the project I run is also a business of like 200 people. So like it's quite a you get these kind of like culture within culture type things that happen over periods of time. I never worked in startups, so I can't really talk about startups. What I will say is I think volatility, if that's the kind of dimension here, is absolutely a factor in terms of kind of what sort of a person fits in what sort of a team, right? But that's not necessarily a junior versus senior thing. So I've got senior people. So probably one of the happiest and saddest people that I've ever had leave Deloitte is Dr. Richard North, who used to be one of my chief engineers, probably the best coder I've ever known, just also a roundedness of being an excellent human being and very good at Java. And like, I love him to bits. And he left Deloitte after 10, 12 years maybe. And it's like, one day I discovered that actually I'm a product company person, and what I want is to have the same desk every day and to meet the same people every day. And the thing for him about consulting was about like starting something and then not getting to finish it, or kind of creating something and having to give it away to someone else, which is a defining feature of kind of the sort of way that we work. And so some people love that. They're like, I absolutely want to do this completely. Like, I want to reinvent things every single day because it's like I love kind of refining my approach to something. And so Rich now works at Skyscanner and is really happy. I think also maybe hiring some makers, but they, for him actually the thing that made him unhappy in his job at some point was volatility, even though he was very senior. And I got junior people that again relish that challenge and actually are great because they're so kind of fungible and up for anything, and it just makes them a really, really valuable in that context, and vice versa. But I think probably what I would look at is to what extent is that kind of change, volatility, something that gives those people energy. And I very often ask people questions like in interviews, like, kind of what motivates and drives them on a slightly more kind of psychological level. And for some people, it's like they actually really want the variety. And for some people, what makes them happy is stability. And it's not like one is right and one is wrong. But I think that dimension is quite important for your culture and for attrition, right? So I would imagine, I mean, maybe if you're a 2-person company, you're probably not going to hire a graduate because you want to look after them. But once you're at a size where like you end up with teams with some sort of pyramid or some sort of leverage, I think if you find the right junior person, they'll probably be more additive than an okay senior person, for example, would probably be my guess.
Cool.
I'm really not sure if we answered that question, but it was an interesting question.
Thanks. It was yeah, it was interesting. Actually, if I could just ask a quick question from Alexandra, like from a point of view of a maker, I mean, what was like that most the thing that you loved the most about the company that you joined as a maker? Like, what was that support that you got that made you feel like, okay, cool, I feel like I've got this and they really have my back?
Okay. Yeah, so basically from day one, Alpha gave me that feeling that I'm very welcome, that it didn't feel like I'm any different from the normal hires, right? So like not pointing out my maker status, but still acknowledging it. So that was one. Two, there was a very clear path of training waiting for me as part of that intake. So I knew that for the first week there will be induction, and then for almost a month, I think, there would be training from focused on Java and then on basically understanding the product, because product is quite vast. It's a vast code base, so to actually not get lost in it. And then immediately after that, when I joined team, I was paired up with a supervisor who is my mentor. And mind that I have changed team, I think 4 times during that 1 year, because Alpha was willing to expose me to different teams, but still the mentor stayed the same. So I had that always the same person to go to if I felt that I didn't understand something, or maybe I didn't know something very silly, like coding wise, or basically I didn't understand how things connect within the product. Plus, another thing, already in Alpha, there were other makers. So there were already people that I knew, that they were there a bit longer than me. So they were always willing to answer my questions. So together, that very welcoming and structured mentoring and training process, yeah, that all gave me this feeling, hey, you belong, hey, we want to invest in you. And well, like there's always space for you to ask questions. You really cannot look silly. We know you don't know anything. So it was a mix of those, but I emphasize the mentor, the person to go to. Yeah.
Thanks. That was great.
Cool. Well, that's taken us to the end of our questions today. So I guess the last few things from me, like I said, we'll be sending everyone a roundup of all of the details today. So please look out for that, and a recording of the event as well. So yeah, I just guess the last thing is thank you to everyone for joining us. Thank you to our speakers for coming along today. And yeah, we hope to see you again very soon. All right, thanks everyone.
Cheers.